Right. I'm Jerry Smith, I'm one of the trustees here, and this is a workshop on multiple asset transfers, particularly around the kind of leisure, cultural, sports sort of arena, which a number of the local authorities I know are increasingly interested in. We've got three speakers who, because of the time, we've got asked to be as brief as they can be, so we've got some time for questions and discussion afterwards and have to finish on time for the next workshop. We've got Anton Schultz from Localism to speak first on the kind of general picture about multiple asset transfers. He's an area that he's researching and involved in. And then we've got Mike McCusker from Fresh Horizons in Huddersfield talking about the work that I've been doing, and Kat Tom from Bromley Baths in Leeds, from Barker in Leeds. She'll explain the difference of the relationship, again about the transfer work that they're doing about swimming pools. So without further ado, Anton, would you like to? Okay. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, yeah, I want to give look, I'll load up my. 1 minute. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to talk about multiple asset transfer. So essentially, change in ownership or management of several buildings, assets, land at the same time to one or more community organisations. But the key thing is it's part of the planned process and the tender process to look at assets in a more strategic context when transferring. So we heard this morning about a bit of the background, and it's kind of really gaining to result of the Quirk Review in 2007. Move on, Jerry. So since then, lots of activity, and this is all kind of led to kind of much greater awareness of asset transfer, but much more examples that we can point to of successes and also some of the failures. Some of the key programs that have come about over the last few years, including sort of work to develop policies within local authorities, but also capital investment into a number of example projects, and many of you here are involved in sort of, and more recently the Localism Act and the community assets of community value legislation coming through. So move on. We are seeing every year we do some research. We commission research into what's happening in terms of asset transfer. And I think now 71% of local authorities have done some kind of asset transfer. And while it's true to date, most of them have been sort of fairly small scale, sort of between 1 and 5. We are seeing an increase of authorities looking at much greater quantities of assets. 11% confirmed transfer of 6 to 10 the last couple of years, and a much smaller number looking at a lot larger quantities. But this is really the beginning of a trend we're seeing, and since this was commissioned, we've seen a 50% increase in the supply of assets for transfer reported to us, and many of these authorities are looking at sort of sometimes 10, 15, 20 assets at the same time. So it's really changing the dynamic of both. With the whole process, really, the way communities are having to react and deal with it, but also the processes and the approach that local authorities are taking. So essentially, yeah, whereas historically a lot of the examples of asset transfer have been about communities having to make the case and convince local authorities to pass on the asset under their management, we're seeing much more in the last couple of years examples of authorities who are basically, as a result of asset rationalisation, looking to communities to help them save the assets for community use. And I'll talk about some of those examples. Over the last couple of years, asset transfer units worked with 15 pilot multiple asset transfer projects. So it's beginning to develop sort of learning about this kind of new type of approach, really. And we'll hear from about some of those specific examples. So yeah, drivers for change, opening public services kind of move, looking to sort of more providers, social value bill, increasing interest in kind of social enterprise provision of public services and the role that community organisations can play in that. The Localism Act, move on. And probably the key one really is local authority asset rationalisation. Been to a couple of events now. BRICS have been doing some events with local authorities, and key item all local authorities managers, how can they rationalise their assets? They want to have less assets, generally they're being pushed to kind of reduce the number of assets they hold. I've heard the figure 20% reduction by 2020. This equates to a huge amount of buildings and resources. So they're trying to achieve revenue savings. They're trying to consolidate cheaper, more efficient accommodation. They're trying to achieve some of the benefits that many of our members do through service co-location, the synergies of putting services together, responding to changes in terms of flexible and mobile working. And there's growing interest from the government in terms of open data, making it easier for people to find who owns their neighbourhood and what buildings are actually available, how they're being used. So all these things are causing local authorities to much more focus on asset transfer at speed and scale. All sorts of issues here. Obviously, they're looking to keep the best, most efficient buildings, and in a lot of cases, withdraw from buildings in less used facilities and so on, which presents lots of challenges. Okay, we're not talking about completely different principles in terms of multiple asset transfer. Key things there in terms of we kind of typically define an asset transfer, which I won't go into lots of detail, most of you are kind of aware what we're talking about. Move on. In terms of the work that we're doing with local authorities and the approach, again, similar principles. It's about having a clearly defined policy and approach. One thing that we've been pushing all authorities to have is a single gateway approach so that community organisations can navigate the complexity of local authorities in terms of developing a coordinated dialogue around asset transfer. Transparency around which assets local authorities are considering for transfer, because having a clear, transparent process about how they decide which assets are treated as investment properties or they're not transfer, which ones they may be prepared to transfer. Having that out in the open helps that debate. But the key to it all is having a proactive approach, really, trying not to sort of wait for communities to approach about specific assets, but having in place a position and a structure that can respond. Okay. Key principles about viability and sustainability hold true, obviously, in multiple asset transfer. But I think perhaps became even more important looking at perhaps multiple projects at the same time. That obviously makes it even more challenging in terms of sustaining the viability of some of these things. Just the reality check, really, in terms of our experience of supporting asset transfers, typically to 2 years. In this kind of move to supply push, if you like, the local authorities transferring lots of buildings that they can't afford to keep anymore. The libraries being one example. It can be said that asset transfers can go through much more quickly, where there is the starting point is that the authority has an intention and a wish to transfer and sustain them, because a lot of the time involved can be that negotiating, that convincing in the first place. So it can shorten the timescales, but still, 6 months is not a lot of time for communities to get together and respond and develop. It could be regarded as the bare minimum, if you like. And capacity issues, when again, there's the capacity issues to manage multiple buildings, are huge. A lot of the groups that are coming forward to take on buildings that are at risk of closure aren't actually formalised groups as such. A lot of them, it's collections of residents coming together for the first time to take on what can be a significant project. Okay, so essentially we're talking about speeding up and scaling out of asset transfer. There's a number of different approaches that we've piloted over the last couple of years and that all authorities have piloted. We skip on a couple of slides, one more. Okay, so one approach is the place-based approach, which is essentially about exploring co-location and asset rationalisation in partnership with the local community and existing community organisations. And a good example there is the Starport Live project. But it's really about identifying which buildings mean the most to the community, which are the most important, and having a sensible discussion around which assets may be surplus to requirements. So the energies of both the local community and the authority can come together in sustaining and developing viable propositions for the most important assets. And that may enable some rationalisation of other assets, but it's much more likely to be in a way that is more acceptable to the local community than if this is done by the local authority in its own way. Another approach is service asset transfer. I mentioned the example of libraries, but this is also true potentially of youth centres, children's centres, and so on. The service departments are having to rationalise not just the assets but the services as well to an extent. So we're seeing en masse, numerous libraries coming into the market at one time and calls for communities to respond and take them on. Huge complexity when it's linked to services in terms of procurement issues, state aid, tutoring, and huge variation in different approaches. Some authorities are looking at this from an asset transfer perspective, looking at buildings. Some of them are looking at more as a procurement approach in terms of commissioning a service linked to a building. There's a whole mishmash of approaches. So it's complex, but there are some interesting examples emerging. Lastly, type of building. So authorities looking collectively at similar types of building, not necessarily a service as such, but community centres being an example. So in Northampton, they looked at their community centres on mass, identified 21 of them that they would consider for transfer. They received 7 different applications to run 8 of the centres. And they've now transferred 15 of those, but one of these was to a new entity, special purpose vehicle, if you like, that had representation from 2 of the other community groups that took on management of a number of them to bring about some efficiency in terms of savings and so on. Still working with the local community organisations there. So, like I said, principles remain the same. It is about community empowerment, viability, sustainability, but as challenging or more so, it's about enhancing services and genuine partnership working with the local authority. But the practicalities in terms of what's required from the organisations and the authority are quite different in terms of the approach and processes. I mentioned before the capacity of organisations to respond, and particularly in areas where asset transfers have worked really well, there's been an established community trust or organisation with a bit of a track record and a strong board. In this context, where lots of buildings put out at the same time in small communities, often don't have that, and that presents very specific challenges. Skip on. So yeah, different approaches. You can be looking at multiple asset transfer to one well-established voluntary community organisation, to a temporary special purpose vehicle, to take assets into ownership to prevent them from being lost during this kind of one-off opportunity before they're sold off for other uses, with the intention of transferring them on to community ownership to allow some more time for capacity to develop. Permanent special purpose vehicles, as in the case of Northamptonshire, groups coming together to form a new entity specifically to take on the management of assets. Move on, different approaches local authorities have taken to multiple asset transfer. In Redcar, they took a competitive approach where they identified a number of assets. They put them up for sale, but also invited applications for community asset transfer at the same time. Assess those to different proposals side by side. Other authorities are taking a more sort of a more discussion dialogue-based approach with communities to sort of co-design sort of what might work in terms of services and buildings in their area. In Buckinghamshire, they're having ongoing dialogue with the communities to find different solutions for each of their libraries, often involving potentially asset transfer or community management. But some interesting hybrid models coming out of that process as well. But quite often as well, authorities will decide in terms of internal reviews which assets they're prepared to transfer and then advertise them. Okay, just summing up really. Key issues, potential barriers in this is as I said before, it's some of the complications around service procurement and the grey area between procuring service and transferring an asset, GP considerations, and capacity of communities to respond at the speed which they're being asked to. See several examples of authorities saying we don't want to lose this building unless a proposal and a business plan is put forward to us in 3 months. starting from scratch, not necessarily the most feasible approach. And obviously, the key issue is the viability of surplus properties, and there is within this approach the ability to look at counterweight assets as a means of making what may be a single asset transfer an unviable proposition, a more viable proposition by linking it to an asset transfer that has more potential to generate income. The example of car parks being one that's been used before. So local authorities can still get efficiency savings, reduce their overheads, but pass on a combination, not just the leftover buildings that they don't want, but also taking more of an open mind to actually transfer some quite valuable assets alongside it on the basis that that's going to enable some of the more challenging asset transfers to work. So I suppose this is largely about taking a more strategic approach and not just one by one building. So that's all I'm going to say. There's loads more information on asset transfer in the website, some of the case studies from the multiple projects there as well. So I'm going to hand it to Mike.
Hi, I'm Hans. I work for an enterprise based in Huddersfield. We're involved in multiple asset transfer at the moment. What you see before you is the Chestnut Centre. It's one of the largest buildings that we manage. The Chestnut Centre was built in 2005, and prior to Barry Quirk coming up, because of great foresight in the people who were putting the project together, part of the conditions of a European Regional Development Fund, which funded most of the capital for the building, was actually built in as one of the outcomes, one of the conditions, that the building would transfer to pressurising the social enterprise within a 10-year period. So, great foresight from that particular project. So, the asset itself is a multi-agency building, and it contains a library, contains a 30-place daycare. It's got 6 light industrial units. It also has the local housing office, West Yorkshire Police community team for the area, and it shows that as well. What's been quite interesting is all those great foresight around the transfer of the building, things have changed, haven't they? Things have changed. So, we've been running the building since 2005. In 2007, the library service said this is a great thriving building, we're going to create a library in there, so we got 450,000 quid worth of grant, built an extension, moved everyone down so we could have a library in the heart of it. And then we said to the library service in 2007, we've successfully managed this building for 2 years, and we've been running since 2002, why don't we run the library under a contract? And that's exactly what we did. So in 2007, we started running a public library under contract to the local authority, which we've been running ever since. So we started from a position where lots of the anchor tenants within the building are local authorities, but the building itself is run by the social enterprise that tries to act as the glue between the different agencies in the building. So, for instance, working with the Children's Centre, when the housing people wanted to do some visioning around the estate. So we acted to actually get the people in there, got kids with disposable cameras, etc. As time has marched on, and as we get closer to the deadline for the transfer, the local authority, under pressure from government cuts, is obviously trying to rationalise what it does. So we're delivering the public library, we're contracted them, and they're now rationalising daycare. So the daycare is transferring out at the point where the asset is going to come to us. So we've stepped into the brief, said, well, we will run the daycare. So, but it's been managed in cooperation, so there's actually no chiefy issues, because they're going to move the existing staff to different nurseries, as we take the daycare involved. So we're changing from a facilities management, and we manage 19 different buildings across Kirklees, to the importance of service delivery and the importance to our communities of retaining those services. Yeah, other assets that we currently manage, we've got an enterprise centre and managed office space, like industrial units, that will be part of the transfer. The way this fits in with our overall business is what we do. We try to see ourselves as an integrated social business. So everything from supporting people back into learning, giving volunteering opportunities, work placement opportunities, so that as the company grows and wins new contracts, people in the deprived areas where we're working have got the opportunity to go for those posts. And we target our recruitment locally, so 85% of our staff live and work within the same postcode. The contracts that we work to grow in order to create those sustainable jobs, we've got a construction arm which has, as of today, got about £2.6 million to convert empty domestic houses into affordable housing. Through bringing the capital to do that, that creates work streams for apprenticeships, for construction workers to come off the dole. If we're working with young people and those ex-construction workers, it then creates a work stream for them. So we refurbish homes, we secure the properties of people who've been the victim of burglary, we manage acting community facilities, we're providing services through our library. We run the library within the building. We've also just taken on the Yorkshire Music Library, which is 500,000 copies of music which are used by choral societies and community organisations and choirs throughout the country. Because we're managing the building, we persuaded them to manage the library. Because we were managing the library, we were in a position where that service was under threat, a national service that's greatly valued, to be able to take that on board. All the time building our skills in library management, building our skills in facilities management. Yep, do you want to go on? That's what empty houses look like. There's 5,000 in Kirklees, there's 750,000. That's a tremendous waste of asset in this country. Let's move on. That's one of our staff reading books to kids. That's kids that are going to be in our nursery. Our buildings are very well used. We're looking at the instances of where local authority is doing a mass transfer, if you like, of 13 libraries or 21 community centres. One of the key issues is, if you've got start-up organisations that are keen to keep the library because they value that library service, if you've got 7 libraries affected, they don't necessarily have the skills to manage the building. They might have the skills because of their interest reports to be able to carry on delivering the service in one way or another. Well, we obviously prefer a social enterprise where you're contracted and paid to run the service rather than on a volunteer basis, but not necessarily the skills to manage the building. Over a period of time, we've got very, very good at managing buildings. The advantage to other community organisations that we work with is that we've taken those skills and managed their community buildings like a facilities management company. The great thing about that is that they get to do the thing that they want to do, the thing they're interested in, the reason they volunteered in the first place. Working with children, working with older people, retaining a library service. They don't have to do the boring stuff about keeping the building safe, clean, open, lights on. And the way that we've managed to do that is by getting good at getting stuff happening in buildings which create income streams to make the building sustainable. In effect, we generate the cash in order for us to pay ourselves to manage their building, and then we profit share with the community organisation. So I think in areas where there's multiple transfers taking place, this idea that either create something similar, create something that can manage those facilities in a professional and cost-effective way, or getting community organisations to cluster to manage their buildings. Yeah. So the things we do when we're managing buildings, we've got remote access. So you press a buzzer, the building's all shuttered up. Press a buzzer, it's actually a phone. It phones our central reception. They check you around the CCTV, check the booking system. When they're sure that you're the person that can be allowed into the building, they then put the alarm code on the computer screen, press a few buttons, the roller shutters come up, the electronic locks come off the doors, the alarm is disabled, and you can reverse the process. And doing that means you've not got people holding keys, you've not got people running around with keys, you've not got the janitor waiting while the yoga group's finishing off at 9 o'clock at night saying, come on. And it means you get better customer experience, it's more cost effective, but it only works when you've got multiple assets that you're managing, because then you've got the cost efficiencies. Centralised booking, centralised business developer, so we've got a guy whose job it is, his only job is to fill those buildings and get income coming into those buildings. And then we've got memory vans, and women with vans, who, as well as doing refurbishment of empty properties, can then maintain. So it means you've got full facilities management, it's social enterprise driven, it benefits both us as an enterprise and creating income streams, but also those assets. I just want to quickly finish by talking about community managed library network. There are somewhere in the region, Anton will correct me, 500 libraries in the pipeline.
At risk closure or not up transfer.
Yeah. So we've got a situation where up and down the country, 500 libraries in the mix as far as a big question mark over their future. What we see with that multiple transfer, if you like, is the need for the same thing as we've got in facilities management, is something that umbrellas, an umbrella network that can help those organisations turn them into long-term sustainable ideas and assets, rather than individual small community organisations left out in the cold on their own. There you go, there's your library, there's your books, away you go. So we've been working with locality to set up a community managed library network that can do things like, pooling our knowledge of community, where there are voluntary and community organisations with a track record in delivering different models of community managed libraries, sharing that expertise, looking at collective book purchasing, looking at buying in or developing expertise that can be shared around, and also looking at an interactive way of sharing the resources that we've built. So, in the context of multiple asset transfers, where specific things like libraries, together we're going to make a much more sustainable go of it than if we each try to do everything on our own. And if there are multiple assets, 21 community centres, it doesn't make sense in just handing them out to individual organisations. Local authorities need to be thinking about, when we're not doing that role of facilities management, how is that going to be achieved, and can it create a social business that benefits both those centres and the greater community. That's it. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Catherine Tom. I work for a charity in West Leeds called Barker Leeds. We support quite a few voluntary and community organisations across West Leeds, helping them develop their community assets, and we go in there with them business support with them to help them develop social enterprise activity and for them to become financially sustainable. But the project I want to talk about today is an asset transfer that we're right in the middle of, which is, which is Bromley Baths, which is Edwardian Swimming Baths, which is based in Bromley in West Leeds. I don't know whether any of you have ever heard of Bromley. Quite a small area of West Leeds, quite socially deprived. And it's an absolutely beautiful swimming baths. It was built in 1904. It's a Grade 2 listed building. It's got a 25-metre swimming pool. It's got the only Russian steam room in the north of England, a fitness room and a small gymnasium. It's a real asset to the local community. The reason it was built was because in the 1900s children kept drowning in the canal, which is quite apt for today with the river running past us. And the local mill owner said, well, we need to do something about it, let's build a swimming bath and let's do free swimming lessons. So a lot of people who grew up in Bromley learned how to swim in the swimming baths, and they used to board it over in the 1940s and 50s when it was too cold to swim in it, and have tea dances there. So it's got a real community love and lots of memories in the baths. Okay, next slide. In February 2011, Leeds City Council announced the plans to reduce the opening hours of the baths, and this was in line with potential closure. I've got to say, at this time, Leeds City Council didn't say they were going to close it. They did say that they didn't have enough money to support it because they just opened another leisure facility just about a mile away from Bromley, and that took a lot of business away from Bromley Baths. We became involved through Barker because Rachel Reeves, the MP for West Leeds, and also our local councillor, held a public meeting to try and talk to community members about the chance of the community groups taking it over, and how this can be prevented, how we can possibly take it over, how we can extend its opening hours and what we can do. My involvement through Barker was to come and talk to the group and to say, and just talk them through the process. Didn't quite realise at the time that my involvement would become a lot further than that. Okay. Just going to throw these on the floor, sorry. So what we did was we started to hold public meetings in Barker, and what I'm going to talk briefly through today is some of the problems that have arisen through these first public meetings, and what we're doing to counteract those problems. And they kind of fit in with what Anton was talking about earlier, about some of the problems that you encounter when it comes to asset transfer. So in May 2011 we formed the Friends of Bromley Baths with Barker as a representational third sector organisation, and then the local community. Within those first meetings we had about 20 to 40 people that would come and go. We held them every 2 weeks, and we were having real issues at the time about getting a core group of people to attend them, and found that we'd always have to repeat what was said at the previous meeting at the next meeting because people were angry and they wanted to know more, and then they hadn't been able to attend, and we had real issues at the time. So in order to get around that, we asked everybody to decide whether they wanted to be involved. So they had to actually say, I'm going to be part of the steering group and I'm going to put my time and effort into making this work. Out of that 20 to 40 people, we had 7 people who came forward and who said that they'd like to work on the project with me through Barker. In June 2011, Leeds City Council put the baths out to an expression of interest, and Friends of Bromley Baths, the 7 of us, through Barker, put in an expression of interest. The reason that we did it at that time through Barker was because we didn't feel that the newly formed group would have the weight behind us to be able to get Leeds City Council to realise that we could do this. So we thought it was easy to do it all. It would be more influential to do it through a third sector organisation, and then eventually pull out the third sector organisation as time went by. So we put in the expression of interest through Barker, and Leeds City Council accepted that expression of interest. In January 2012, we submitted a full 100-page business plan to Leeds City Council, and this took considerable time for us to do, and all 7 members of the steering group were very much involved in writing and putting together this business plan. It had full market research, which involved us going out into the streets in December and doing 350 questionnaires with the local community. But at the moment, all the staff have agreed that they'll be redeployed to other swimming baths, and that temporary staff will be brought in if they do decide to move on. But like I said, 2P is still a massive issue, and at any point the staff could turn around and we wouldn't be able to take the project on. We've had to be really careful with the unions as well. We've had to have complete silence up until the council in May 2012 agreed the business plan, which is really difficult when you've got to work in swimming baths and people know the potential plans for it, and already people are starting to leave and move their memberships to other swimming baths. Luckily we've got lots of support behind the project, and we found that because of the media interest in the project, actually the usage of the baths has increased rather than decreased, and they've seen a lot more new customers there. And like I said, the consultation, 3 weeks ago I went into the first meeting with the staff at the baths, and they were really suspicious of me and Barker and what we were going to do, and they were really angry, which is understandable. I think I'd be really angry in a similar circumstance, and it's taken us to gain their trust for them now to be able to tell the customers what's happening and to do it with a smile rather than a grimace when customers come in. So the solutions that we've had to these problems is that we've had to get quite a lot of advice. You're probably going to ask me lots of questions about BenComs. I hope not, because I'm not the master of BenComs. Another member of our group is the person that decided what the form of company we should take. We've had advice from locality around 2P, around industrial providence societies. We've had advice from other leisure facilities about how to set up and run private leisure facilities. And we've had a consultant working with us from the Lenton Centre in Nottingham who's been absolutely marvellous, that's worked with us for 6 months. Again, the redeployment of staff to other facilities. We're going to have a transparent recruitment process which helps the 2P implications. We've made promise to the unions that any member of staff can apply for jobs if they wish to do so. So once they're redeployed to other leisure facilities, of course we'll welcome them to apply for jobs at Bromley Baths. And also one of the major things that we've really found is partnership working with the council. Leeds City Council have been absolutely marvellous all the way through the process. They've helped us from day one, from when we put the expression of interest in, and they said that it's the only way that it could have worked, it's the only way they got faith in us as a local community group, was for us to have constant communication with them. We've showed them the business plans all the way throughout, and they've checked them and they've come back to us and said, no, that's not right, you're doing that wrong, you need to do that, and it's been absolutely brilliant. And I would suggest to anyone that if you are looking at taking over a large community asset, you do constantly keep in touch with them. Yeah. And that's us lot waving when the council said yes, which is unfortunately the people in the steering group have cut off this photo for some reason, and all the people that didn't write the business plan plant themselves right in the middle of it, including the MPs and the local councillors, which is always the case when any publicity is involved. That's it, thank you.
Thanks all three of you, that was really interesting. I think we had a very good setting out the context and Anton. There's some really scintillating examples of asset transfers from our two speakers. John, can I just check, when we're doing questions and answers from the floor, do we need the roving mic to go round, otherwise it won't get picked up?
Yes.
We do, okay. Could I have the three speakers sat up here then in that case? I think that's the only way we can practically do this. It's on, yeah. It's a while to warm up lightning. Okay. Questions from the floor then. What we'll do is I'll hand the mic to you if I pick you out. If you could say who you are, where you're from, and if your question's addressed to a particular member of the panel, as it were, could you say to everyone, it's just general, or just let people out, just to see who wants to pick it up. I know you, sir, you'd had a question. Do you want to ask that now to start with?
Well, it was a question for Catherine, really. I was thinking about my name's Mike Smith, and I was originally a trustee of this Headley Bridge Community Association, and we plumped for doing a limited company, limited by guarantee. We had a look at the way you were proposing to set your group up, or the Friends of the Baths, and we just wondered why you didn't go down the route that we did.
We wanted to be able to issue community shares, which is why we went into an industrial provident. Because there's the wider group of Friends of Bromley Baths, obviously there's 20 to 40 that came to the first meetings, but actually signed up to our mailing list. We've got about 200 to 300 people now who are constantly wanting to be kept in touch with the baths, with us about the baths. And at the time we were thinking, well, how can we, from this great community spirit, and we need money, what can we do? So we decided that the right to issue community shares would be the best option for us. We're still a not-for-profit, so the Bencom that we're looking at, the shares won't make a dividend at all. So unfortunately, they're not going to get any money back for the shares. They will be able to get their shares back in a year's time if they do want them back. So there'll be a year share lock, and they will have the right to take them back after a year. But in order for us to raise funds quickly, we decided to go through the Bencom route.
Hi. Hi, it's Jeremy from Charity Bank. It's a question for Mike really around your libraries, because obviously libraries, they're free to the point of consumer. So I just wonder, as a social enterprise, how you can manage to make any money from them or sustain them.
Yeah, okay. We've got two different libraries and there's two different ways of running it. The first library is a traditional library that you normally come across. And the way they make money out of that is that we contract with the local authority in order to deliver that service. So we're paid to deliver that service. But in order to make it viable, because it's not a huge contract, our library staff deliver a range of different things. So when I talked about the central bookings or remote access, they deliver that. We deliver for the local Castleminster Credit Union, we deliver a credit union service, the access front of house to the buildings, doing copy. So they work very hard, they're very flexible, but it means that from different slices of income, the overall building and the library service itself can generate a surplus. The other, in the Yorkshire Music Library, basically all it's called the Yorkshire Music. It was inherited by 11 councils when the West Riding went away. It's half a million books of music, but it offers a service throughout the country. It has always worked on the basis of an administration fee, so there's an administration fee per book, and people are generally carrying books for a 6-month period in order to do their rehearsals and their performance, and that they will order 100 messiahs. So it's reasonable amounts. The difference between us doing it and what the Wakefield Council is delivering on behalf of the 11 local authorities is that we have no public subsidy. So basically we have to do it far more cost effectively. We went through a different cheapy route, which was around, basically we could not have, the service would have closed in March. We couldn't run the service as an enterprise if we had the staff that came with it, with the local authority rates. So the staff were going to go. If they transferred to us, they were going to go because we couldn't make it stack up. And what we used there was a compromise agreement. So basically, the staff within their compromise agreement said we object to the transfer, which is the only way to protect yourself in a cheapy situation. They got enhancements. They got a big enhancement. The fact is, we couldn't take them on because as soon as we take them on, the business would have been unviable. So it's horrible people losing their jobs. They have got an enhancement over what would happen if the service had closed. And if the service had closed, there are thousands of groups, community groups up and down the country that wouldn't be able to operate on a commercial basis of buying music for performances.
Okay, that's, I'm afraid, as you will have noticed, people are coming in for the next workshop in this room, and we have just run out of time. I'm sorry there wasn't quite as much time as we'd like for questions, but I think we had some very, very interesting presentations there. So thank you all for attending, and enjoy the next workshop.